As the sun sets, the world begins its slow, graceful retreat into quiet. Streetlights cast a soft glow, conversations fade to whispers, and the clock ticks gently toward the deep stillness of night. Yet for so many of us, this external peace feels like a cruel joke, a stark contrast to the chaos brewing within. The day's demands may have subsided, but our thoughts, those relentless nagging ones, are wide awake. They replay awkward moments from hours ago, rehearse worst-case scenarios for tomorrow, or plunge headfirst into a deep pool of self-doubt and regret. It feels unfair, doesn't it? After all the energy spent just getting through the day, you now face a second battle, wrestling with your own mind simply to find rest. But you are not alone in this. There is a reason your thoughts grow louder when the world grows quiet. The Stoics understood this intimately. The battle is not against the noise outside, Marcus Aurelius wrote by lamplight, but against the storm within. When the lights go out, we are left with only ourselves, and it is in these hushed hours that the real work begins. Not the work of the world, but the work of the mind. This is about more than sleep. It is about reclaiming your peace, about refusing to let your mind be held captive by fears, regrets, and unfinished conversations. Tonight, let us lean into the wisdom of the ancients, not as scholars, but as people searching for stillness in the midst of the noise. Because peace isn't simply given, it is practiced. And Stoicism, in its raw and practical truth, might just be the calm you've been searching for. It's a strange paradox how silence, something we crave during the day's chaos, can become so overwhelming at night. You move through the hours ticking off tasks, answering to others, solving problems. Your body is in motion, your mind occupied. But when the day ends and the noise fades, you are suddenly, utterly alone with your thoughts. That's when it hits you. The concerns you brushed aside while busy now rush forward, as if they've been waiting all day for this quiet moment of confrontation. The unresolved conversation, the worry about tomorrow, the memory of a mistake you thought you'd forgotten. They don't knock politely. They arrive like a flood. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The night is a stage for the unconscious. It reveals itself not to torment you, but because it has finally been given the space to speak. The mind doesn't race without reason. When the body stills, the nervous system shifts gears. Without an external task to anchor it, its energy turns inward, searching for unfinished business, loose ends, and unprocessed emotions. What you didn't allow yourself to feel during the day now demands your attention. In this way, silence is never truly empty. It is filled with everything we have yet to face. The truth is, many of us stay busy not because we are productive, but because we are afraid of what stillness might reveal. As Socrates warned, beware the barrenness of a busy life. Stillness, if you let it, will hold up a mirror. The nights feel heavy because we have trained ourselves to avoid that mirror, drowning it out with endless scrolling, background noise, and mental chatter. Anything but the vulnerability of being alone with ourselves. And, when all distractions fall away, what remains is the raw, unfiltered truth. The fears we carry, the guilt we pretend doesn't matter, the longing for something we can't quite name. It is not weakness to feel this way. It is profoundly human. The Stoics taught that suffering comes not from events themselves, but from our judgment of them. As Epictetus reminded us, we are disturbed not by what happens, but by our opinions about what happens. And at night, the silence simply unmasks those opinions. There is an honesty that only the darkness invites. While it can feel brutal, it also carries an invitation to listen, to notice, to finally feel. The thoughts that race are often the ones we never permitted to surface, yet they have been there all along, quietly shaping our choices, our moods, our lives. In the stillness, we are given a choice, to run from them once more, or to sit with them and understand what they are trying to tell us. Knowing yourself, Aristotle observed, is the beginning of all wisdom. And that kind of knowing doesn't come from motion. It comes from the pause. But that pause can feel unbearable if you expect it to be immediately peaceful. It rarely is. It takes practice to become comfortable in your own silence. It takes courage to let the thoughts come without being swept away by each one. The Buddhists speak of the monkey mind, forever jumping, grasping, and fleeing. The Stoics, too, recognized this inner restlessness. In his journals, Marcus Aurelius reminded himself again and again to return to the present, to what was within his control. "You have power over your mind," he wrote, "not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." This isn't a command to silence the noise, but a way to relate to it differently. When you begin to see racing thoughts not as enemies, but as signals, everything changes. That flood of memories and fears is trying to tell you something. Perhaps you are carrying too much. Perhaps there is a conversation you need to have. Perhaps you have been trying to be everything to everyone, and your spirit is wearing thin. The thoughts don't arrive with perfect clarity. They come jumbled, exaggerated, dramatic. But if you can let them land without grabbing onto them, without pushing them away, they begin to sort themselves out, like sediment settling in water. What is important remains. The rest floats away. In that moment, you are no longer drowning in thought. You are observing, and you remember that your thoughts are not facts. They are not prophecies. They are not permanent. Plato wrote, "The first and best victory is to conquer self." That battle begins not with aggression, but with awareness, with the gentle discipline of staying present with what is, rather than reacting to what might be. This is why the night matters. It is not just a time to rest, it is a time to reckon, to sift through the noise and find the still voice underneath. That voice doesn't shout, it whispers. And if you listen, really listen, it has wisdom to offer about what you truly value, what is weighing you down, and what you need to release to finally find peace. The mind may race, but that does not mean it is broken. It means it is awake. And being awake, in this way, is the beginning of healing. So, the next time your thoughts surge after the world goes quiet, do not panic. Do not try to escape. Let them come. And then, breathe. Remind yourself that this too is part of being alive, that the storm will pass, and that peace comes not from avoiding the silence, but from learning to live within it. Underneath all the noise, there is a stillness that has been waiting for you all along. It is like the sudden clarity of a light switched on in a darkened room. The furniture has not moved, but now you see the path between. You are less likely to stumble. This is the gift of Stoic awareness. It grants you clarity without demanding the problem itself vanish into the night. Plato wrote that the beginning is the most important part of the work. And that beginning, the simple act of noticing your thoughts without being swept away by them, is what changes the landscape of the mind. You begin to see that not every thought demands a response. Not every mental storm must be weathered tonight. Some are mere echoes from a forgotten wound. Others, future fears disguised as present emergencies. Many are simply old habits of the mind, grooves worn deep by time. And as you observe, you understand. With understanding comes space. Within that space, calm takes root. And from that place of calm, You can choose your next move, even if it is as simple as taking a deep breath, turning over in bed, and deciding not to follow that thought down its familiar, winding path. This is not a skill you master overnight. It is a practice you return to gently, without judgment, especially when the storm is loud and confusing. For the Stoics knew that your thoughts are not your enemy. They are not problems to be fixed. They are signals. And if you can listen, not perfectly but patiently, you will begin to hear the truth beneath them. And that truth, once understood, has the power to quiet even the loudest mind. There is a quality to the stillness of night that magnifies everything. A small worry from the afternoon can swell into a mountain by midnight. A passing comment can echo like a siren in the silence. You lie in bed, seeking peace, but instead your mind unlocks doors you never knew existed. Thoughts begin to stack, one upon the other, until suddenly you are buried beneath their weight. And in that moment, a profound helplessness can set in, a feeling that you have lost command of your own inner world. The lack of distraction, no tasks, no conversations, no noise, only amplifies the feeling. There is only you, your thoughts, and a darkness that seems to stretch into eternity. But this feeling, this deep sinking helplessness, is not a flaw in you. It is ancient. Epictetus, a Stoic philosopher born into slavery, knew it intimately. His life was defined by limitations, by external forces far beyond his control. Yet he taught a principle that turns this helplessness on its head. Some things are within our power, and some are not. And hidden within that simple distinction is a freedom most of us overlook. Because when you are caught in the spiral of nighttime anxiety, what you truly feel is the immense weight of trying to control the uncontrollable, the future, the opinions of others, the final words of a past conversation. The mind clings to these things, replaying and rehearsing, as if this repetition could somehow alter reality. But it cannot. The one thing you can control is your relationship to these thoughts. There is a quiet power in this idea. The helplessness you feel does not spring from the thought itself, but from the belief that you have no choice but to follow where it leads. Epictetus would argue that your only true freedom lies in mastering your response. It's not what happens to you, he said, but how you react to it that matters. This wisdom applies most profoundly to what happens inside your own head. The stories you tell yourself when you are tired and alone can color your entire world. If you believe you are at the mercy of your mind, you will remain its prisoner. But a shift occurs the moment you realize that even here, in the dark, you have a choice. You cannot control the arrival of a thought. That is automatic. But you can choose what to do next. You can choose to observe it instead of obey it, to question it instead of absorbing it as truth. You can gently guide your attention back to your breath, to the feeling of the blankets on your skin, grounding yourself in what is real instead of what is imagined. This doesn't always make the worry disappear, but it shrinks it. It creates a sliver of space between you and the spiral. And sometimes, that space is all you need to breathe again. Carl Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." This applies not just to the events of your life, but to every thought that drifts through your mind. You are not your fear. You are not your most painful memory. You are not the anxious prediction your brain whispers at 2 a.m. You are the awareness beneath these things, the part of you that can witness the storm without being swept out to sea. That is where your power lives. This is the inner freedom the Stoics spoke of, not an absence of trouble but the presence of self-mastery. There is another strange power in putting a name to what you feel, not a poetic narrative, just a simple, honest label. This is fear. This is shame. This is worry, visiting again. On the surface, it seems like a small act, but it quietly changes everything. The moment you name a thought, you create just enough distance to see it for what it is. It is no longer an all-consuming truth, but a visitor passing through. You shift from being the emotion to observing it. The Stoics called this the discipline of assent, the practice of pausing to examine an impression before agreeing to its terms. Epictetus advised we never say, "I am afraid," but rather, "There is fear." The distinction is crucial. One statement fuses your identity with a fleeting feeling. The other recognizes it as a transient event in your awareness. As Carl Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Unnamed emotions hold that kind of power. But when you give them a name, you bring them into the light, and in the light, they lose their grip. This is not just philosophy. It is how the brain works. Neuroscience shows that labeling emotions reduces activity in the brain's alarm system and activates the regions responsible for reason. It returns control to the part of you that can respond with wisdom. It also allows you to speak to yourself more gently. You label your emotions not to criticize, but to understand, to slow the storm and find your footing. But some thoughts do not yield to logic or labels. They sit, heavy and unresolved, like a stone in the chest. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, knew this feeling well. His private journals were not written for an audience. They were a practice, a way to steady himself. When a problem could not be solved, he shifted his focus from the problem itself to his response to it. "You have power over your mind," he reminded himself, "not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This is not a hollow mantra. It is a roadmap for those nights when the weight of the unfixable feels crushing. Marcus did not try to outthink uncertainty. He accepted it. He would ask himself, "Is this within my control?" And if the answer was no, he practiced letting it go. Not with indifference, but with a conscious wisdom that understood a mind chasing every unresolved thought is a mind that will never find rest. This is a call to prioritize your energy. If you are lying awake, replaying something that will not change, that is your cue. Let it be, not out of defeat, but out of wisdom. Draw a line in your mind. On one side, what you can influence. On the other, what you cannot. And then, gently, practice setting down the second list. Acknowledge it, and then place it outside of yourself. This act alone can shift the weight. Your nervous system calms, your breathing deepens. For your mind was not built to carry the burden of every possible future, but to meet this present moment with grace. The goal is not to silence your thoughts, but to stand calmly in their presence. To develop a steadier relationship with the noise, because it is not the noise that breaks us, it is how we meet it. And with this perspective, even the loudest mind can be softened by stillness. Even the most restless night can become a place not of panic, but of peace. Some entries show a man frustrated, tired, disheartened. Yet he returned, again and again, to the discipline of the mind, to choosing his focus, to letting go of what had no solution in that moment. And that is the part we can take with us, because we all face moments where the weight of uncertainty grows too loud, where the deep silence of the night becomes a backdrop for our worries. In those moments, what we need is not more thought. What we need is clarity. It begins with a quiet question. Is this mine to fix? If it is, then act. Even the smallest step will bring relief. If it is not, then surrender. Not with apathy, but with acceptance. This is what the Stoics taught, not to be emotionless, but to be anchored, especially when the storms roll in. There is a humility in this practice, a quiet strength, a wisdom that doesn't need to solve everything to feel at peace. It simply knows its limits and honors them. Marcus Aurelius never conquered every thought, but he refused to let the unsolvable ones run his life. That is the lesson he left behind, one that still whispers through the centuries. Focus on the space where your power lives. Let the rest go. And perhaps that is enough for tonight. Not certainty, not perfection, just enough presence to choose what matters and release what does not. Just enough stillness to remember you are not your worry. You are the one who decides what it means. And in that, even the most restless mind can begin to rest. There is something sacred in the way words settle on a page when the rest of the world has gone quiet. When the noise dies down and the distractions fall away, writing becomes more than an outlet. It becomes a ritual, not in a religious sense, but in a deeply human one, a practice that gently guides the mind from chaos into clarity. A few lines scribbled in a notebook before bed can carry more weight than 100 thoughts bouncing around your head, because writing, unlike thinking, has structure. It gives shape to what felt formless. It turns noise into language. It becomes a soft landing for the mental debris we carry all day. We rarely realize how many unspoken things we hold on to until we sit still and try to put them into words. Worries, regrets, small resentments, things we wish we had said differently. During the day, we push them down, numb them with productivity or noise. But at night, they rise. And if we do not meet them, they simply float, waiting. Writing is the act of sitting down and saying, "I see you." It doesn't demand that we solve anything. It simply invites us to notice, to name, to release. Marcus Aurelius did this almost every night. His meditations were not written for publication. They were written for survival, for sanity, for self-examination. He faced war, betrayal, the constant weight of leadership, and yet he returned to the page with honesty. He wrote not to impress others, but to remind himself of what mattered, of what was in his control, of the man he wanted to be. We can do the same. Not with long essays or perfect grammar, but with a few honest sentences before sleep. Carl Jung believed that what remains unconscious will direct your life until you bring it to awareness. That is precisely what journaling does. It is a mirror that shows you the patterns you were too busy to see during the day. It reveals the thoughts that echo quietly in the background. Thoughts of fear, of anger, of longing. All of them want the same thing, to be acknowledged. And when you give them that attention, just by writing them down, you begin to reclaim your mind from the grip of unconscious reaction. The act itself need not be dramatic. You can begin with something simple. Here is what felt heavy today, or what I keep thinking about tonight is. That small prompt opens a door, and once it is open, even for just 5 minutes, something begins to shift. The emotion that felt overwhelming becomes something you can observe. The thought that would not let go becomes something you can hold, examine, and then put down. You don't need to resolve it. You just need to give it a place to rest. Socrates taught that the unexamined life is not worth living. This doesn't mean we must analyze every emotion or become experts in philosophy. It simply means we benefit from reflection, from looking back, even briefly, and asking, did I live today as I wish to live? Writing is how we answer that question, not always with certainty, but with sincerity. When you write about your day, you create a kind of closure, like finishing a chapter, so your mind isn't stuck rereading the same lines all night long. Writing also allows for gentleness. In our minds, we can be harsh. We criticize, we replay mistakes, we worry about things beyond our control. But on the page, there is an opportunity to shift that tone, to meet yourself with patience, to say, "That was hard today, but I handled it," or "I wasn't proud of that moment, but I learned from it." That voice, the one that understands and forgives, grows stronger the more we write. And the stronger it becomes, the easier it is to sleep. Aristotle believed that virtue is not something you have, but something you practice. That character is built through repeated actions. If you practice honesty, you become honest. If you practice reflection, you become wise. And that is what this ritual is about. Not just unloading emotions, but shaping who you are, one night at a time. It is in these small moments before sleep that you begin to build someone calmer, more grounded, more clear. Over time, this practice leaves its mark. You begin to recognize your own patterns. You catch yourself earlier when your mind begins to spiral. You start to notice what triggers your anxiety and what fills you with peace. You become more fluent in your own inner language. And that fluency is power, because when you understand yourself, you are not so easily knocked off balance. You meet stress with resilience. You meet fear with perspective. You meet yourself as you are, without judgment. Even when you don't know what to say, the simple act of putting pen to paper helps. You can write a list. 3 things that felt good today. 3 things you are grateful for. 1 thing you want to do better tomorrow. You can write about the weather if that is all you have, because what matters is not the content. It is the attention. The ritual itself becomes a signal to your nervous system. The day is done. Now, we slow down. Now, we return. Plato once said that writing is a form of remembering. In these quiet moments, what we remember is not just the events of the day, but the meaning within them. The way a simple conversation lingered. The way a mistake revealed something unseen. The way a quiet act of kindness softened your edges. These are the details that get lost if we never pause. Writing is how we catch them. It is how we honor them. And some nights you will notice something beautiful. After just a few words, you will begin to feel lighter. The mind, which felt so full just minutes ago, begins to soften. The body begins to relax. The world no longer feels so loud because you made space for reflection, because you chose not to carry it all inside. That is the quiet power of this practice. It is not dramatic. It is not loud, but it is deeply transformative. It gives you back your breath. It turns your attention inward, where all the noise eventually settles. And in that space, you find peace. Not because everything is solved, but because everything has a place. Even the pain, even the uncertainty, it all finds room. And that room, created by your own hand, becomes a sanctuary. So write. Even if it is just 1 sentence, 1 word. Make it a habit, not because you have to, but because you deserve that moment of peace, that return to yourself. Let the page hold what you no longer need to carry. And as you close the notebook and lay your head down, know that you did something good for your mind tonight. You created stillness. You created clarity. You created peace. And you did it with nothing more than a pen, a little honesty, and the decision to meet yourself right where you are. Overthinking wears many disguises. It can feel like preparation, like control, like intelligence. You tell yourself, if I just run through this 1 more time, I'll be ready. And so you do, again and again. You replay the conversation. You reimagine the situation. You rehearse the future until it becomes a loop you cannot escape. But here is the truth. Overthinking is not clarity. It is noise dressed up as strategy. And the more we indulge it, especially at night, the further we drift from peace. What we believe is helping us prepare is precisely what is keeping us stuck. There is a quiet lie embedded in overthinking. The idea that if you think through every possible outcome, you will avoid pain. That somehow, by mentally rehearsing the worst, you can soften its blow, or even prevent it. But life does not work that way. It gives no bonus points for worrying in advance. In fact, it subtracts from your present, because the moment you are in, the one where you could rest, reflect, or simply breathe, is being hijacked by a future that does not yet exist. As Epictetus said, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. If you have ever laid in bed rehearsing how someone might react, or replaying what you should have said hours ago, you know what he meant. The suffering is not in the event. It is in the rehearsal. The brain's natural instinct is to scan for threats. It is part of what keeps us alive. But when left untrained, it turns that instinct inward. It becomes hypervigilant, always scanning, never arriving. Instead of protecting you, it ends up draining you. Carl Jung believed that what you resist persists, and overthinking, at its core, is a form of resistance, a refusal to trust the unknown. It is the mind's way of saying, I am not ready to let go. But the irony is that letting go is not the end of preparation. It is the beginning of true clarity. Because when you stop obsessively rehearsing, you finally give your attention to what is here. And what is here right now is the only place you can actually make a difference. There is no certainty in life. Even the Stoics, with all their wisdom, understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius did not write his meditations to make life predictable. He wrote them to make peace with its unpredictability. If you are distressed by anything external, he wrote, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. Overthinking inflates our estimates. It makes problems feel larger than they are, and makes us feel smaller than we are. The only way to shrink the fear back to its real size is to return to the present. Presence does not mean ignoring the future. It means acknowledging it without being consumed by it. When you ground yourself in the now, in the feel of your breath, the weight of your body, the quiet of the night, you teach your mind to rest. You give it something real to hold on to. Because the future, no matter how vivid your imagination, is always fiction until it arrives, and the past is already gone. What remains is this moment, and this moment is always manageable, even when it isn't easy. Aristotle said, the energy of the mind is the essence of life. Where you place that energy shapes not just your mood, but your character. Overthinking scatters that energy across timelines and worries, making it harder to act, to focus, to sleep. But when you draw that energy inward, when you ask, what can I actually do now? Something changes. You shift from reaction to intention. You stop rehearsing life and start living it. And let us be honest, most of what we overthink never happens. You have lived long enough to know this is true. Most of your imagined catastrophes never came to pass, and the ones that did never felt the way you imagined anyway, because reality has texture, shape, nuance. It forces you to rise in ways your late-night predictions could never have prepared you for. That is why presence is so powerful. It teaches you to meet life where it is, not where your fears project it to be. Socrates said, the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. That is not defeatist. That is freedom. When you stop trying to anticipate every twist, you get to show up with curiosity instead of fear. You get to listen instead of assume. You get to sleep instead of spiral. It is not that the future doesn't matter. It is that you cannot live it now. And if you cannot live it now, you do not need to carry its weight. There is an emotional honesty in presence that overthinking avoids. Overthinking creates the illusion of doing something, but it often masks what we are unwilling to feel. fear, shame, powerlessness. These emotions cannot be thought through, they must be felt through. And ironically, when you stop running from them, they tend to soften. Writing helps, breathing helps, even silence helps, because in those moments you are not feeding the loop, you are stepping out of it. Plato described the mind as a charioteer pulled by two horses, one of reason, the other of emotion. When they are in conflict, the chariot veers. Overthinking is what happens when reason tries to overpower emotion instead of understanding it. The goal is not to shut off emotion or ignore logic, but to guide both with awareness. And awareness always begins in the present, not in the imagined future, but in the felt experience of now. You do not need to stop thinking altogether. You just need to notice when thinking turns into looping. When the same thought has passed through your mind 5, 10, 20 times, it is no longer helping. It has become a bid for control. And control, as the Stoics remind us, is almost always an illusion. What you can control is your breath, your posture, your response, your attention. And when you bring your attention back to those things, you reclaim your peace. Peace is not passive, it is active. It is a choice, made again and again, to meet this moment with your full presence. Not to escape what might happen, but to be anchored in what is happening. To say, this is enough for now. It does not mean giving up on your plans. It means refusing to be ruled by the what-ifs. Because your strength does not come from guessing right. It comes from showing up with clarity, no matter what arrives. So tonight, instead of rehearsing a future you cannot predict, return to the present you can influence. Breathe. Write. Sit still. Let your mind be here. Let your thoughts pass without gripping them. You do not need to solve everything to find rest. You just need to stop pretending that worry is a form of wisdom. It is not. Presence is. And you have access to it. Not tomorrow, not someday, but right now. When your mind will not stop spinning, when thoughts collide and race and spiral with no clear destination, your breath is still there, steady, patient, unaffected by the stories in your head. Stoicism, at its core, is not just a mental framework. It is a way of being in your body. The Stoics knew that the mind and body are not separate. They believed that how we hold ourselves, how we breathe, how we move, all of it shapes how we think and feel. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself to return to his breath, to ground his reason not in the chaos around him, but in the calm he could create within. There is something simple, even humble, about breathing. It does not ask for much. You do not have to be enlightened or perfect to do it. You just have to stop, pay attention, inhale, and exhale. And in those few seconds you return to something ancient and powerful. Your breath becomes a signal, not just to your body, but to your nervous system. A slow, deep breath tells your body that it is safe, that you do not need to run, to rehearse, to fix anything right now. This is the opposite of panic. This is presence. Aristotle said, "The soul never thinks without a picture, but before the picture, there is breath." Breath is the foundation of awareness, the invisible current that carries your attention. When you feel as if you are drowning in thought, the breath is your lifeline. You follow it down, past the noise, into the quiet rhythm of your own being. The Stoics taught that you do not fight a storm by shouting at it. You stand still and steady yourself against it. Your breath is that stillness. It is your anchor when the waves rise. Think about how the body responds to stress. The heart speeds up, the shoulders tense, breathing becomes shallow and quick. These are not random reactions. They are signals. Your body is trying to tell you something. And instead of ignoring it, Stoicism invites you to listen, to work with the body, not against it. Epictetus reminded us that some things are within our control and some are not. The breath is always yours. You do not need permission to slow it down. You do not need the world to calm down before you do. Carl Jung spoke of integration, of bringing the unconscious into the light. One of the most direct ways to begin that process is through the body. The breath is not symbolic, it is literal. And yet, it holds deep meaning. When you begin to breathe slowly, intentionally, you create a pause. And in that pause, thoughts lose their grip. They do not disappear, but they lose their urgency. You see them more clearly, and in seeing them, you remember something important. You are not your thoughts. You are the observer, the one behind the screen. Socrates believed the body must be trained alongside the soul, not as a vanity project, but as a practice of discipline and clarity. The Stoics were not detached intellectuals floating above the physical world. They trained, they walked, they fasted, they breathed. They knew that the way we live in our bodies affects the way we live in our minds. When your breath is shallow and tight, your thoughts will likely follow. When your breath deepens, your awareness expands. There is a reason meditation, yoga, even ancient battle rituals all center around the breath. It brings coherence. It brings you home. Breathing also reconnects you to time. Most anxiety lives in the future. Most regret lives in the past. But the breath, it is only ever here, now. It will not follow you into tomorrow. It does not cling to yesterday. When you focus on your breath, you align with the present moment. And the present moment is where all of your actual power resides. You cannot take meaningful action tomorrow if you are paralyzed today. You cannot solve a problem when your nervous system believes it is under attack. The breath is the first step back to solid ground, the simplest way to tell yourself, I am here, and here I am safe. Your breath is a quiet reminder to your body that you are safe. Safe enough to reflect, to feel, to think with clarity. Even within philosophy, a world that so often champions reason and logic, the Stoics anchored their wisdom in lived experience. Marcus Aurelius did not just write about stillness, he practiced it through breath, posture, and habit. His journals are filled with commands to return to the self, to stand firm like a rock against the tide. And these were not mere metaphors. They were physical instructions. Your body speaks the language of presence long before the mind catches up. That is why breathing is not a backup plan. It is the primary one. When you notice your thoughts becoming frantic or scattered, when the weight of the day presses down in the stillness of night, the solution is not always to think harder. Sometimes it is simply to close your eyes and take 3 slow breaths. That is the reset. In that moment, the spiral slows, and the space between your thoughts opens just enough for clarity to enter. This is not magic. It is physiology meeting philosophy. Had they known the science, the Stoics would have understood it intimately. They would have seen, in our modern studies, the proof of what they already lived, that a slow, deep breath activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's own mechanism for calm and healing. They understood that the path to inner peace was not through control, but through cooperation with nature, with life, and with yourself. Your breath is the most natural part of you. It arrives without asking and leaves without effort. In the space between, it is your most direct path home. When you cannot think straight, breathe straight. Let your breath be your first response, reminding you that you are not behind, not broken, not bound by the story your mind is spinning. You are here, fully, and that is where peace begins. Not in the next answer, but in one quiet inhale, followed by one slower exhale, again and again, until the mind remembers it does not have to carry everything alone. Gratitude, it seems, has a reputation problem. It is too often dismissed as a cliché, something fluffy and decorative, like a motivational poster you hang but never truly see. But the gratitude that truly matters, the kind the Stoics practiced, is not about forcing positivity. It is a deliberate, purposeful training of your attention, especially when the mind defaults to the darkness of all that is missing, wrong, or uncertain. For that is when it matters most, not when life is easy, but when it is not. For many, there comes a point in the evening when the world grows quiet, but the mind does not. That is when it reaches for the conversation that went awry, the mistake from 5 years ago, the future it cannot predict. In that chaos, gratitude becomes a kind of mental posture, a way of turning your head gently toward what is here, not to deny the worries, but to loosen their grip. As Carl Jung observed, what you resist not only persists, but will grow in size. Seen through this lens, gratitude is not resistance. It is redirection. It is choosing to illuminate something real, something you can hold, even when everything else feels unsteady. And it does not take much, just a breath, a pause, and a question. What is good right now? Not perfect, just good. It could be the comfort of the pillow beneath your head, or the quiet rhythm of your own heart. These are not throwaway details. They are the scaffolding of presence. And the Stoics knew that presence was the only true antidote to anxiety. The act of noticing what is good is the act of pulling your mind out of the spiral. Gratitude interrupts the loop. It offers something grounded, something that does not need to be fixed or predicted, only appreciated. And the reason this practice is so effective is not merely philosophical. It is physiological. Focusing on gratitude releases chemicals in the brain that calm the nervous system. It gives your body a chance to step out of fight or flight. This is not fluff. It is maintenance for the mind. Aristotle spoke of eudaimonia, a state of human flourishing. Gratitude is a bridge to that state. It helps you see the quiet ways you are already living your values. Perhaps you offered someone kindness when you were tired. Perhaps you endured a hard day without letting it harden you. These are victories, and they deserve to be named. Writing them down gives them weight. It tells your brain, this matters. This is what we choose to remember. And that choice, repeated night after night, reshapes how you meet your days. It trains your mind to recognize what is steady and whole, even when the surface feels turbulent. This is not spiritual fluff. This is emotional strength. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily of what he possessed, not to deny longing, but to recognize enough. Enough. That is the quiet gift of this practice. When your mind whispers that you haven't done enough, gratitude allows you to answer, maybe, but I have this. And sometimes that is the difference between restlessness and rest. Long before minimalism became a trend, the Stoics understood the quiet wisdom of simplicity. They spoke of it not as an aesthetic, but as a way of life, an emotional clarity that begins in your surroundings and seeps inward. And as the day ends, as distractions fade and the world grows still, the clutter we have ignored begins to echo in the silence. Physical clutter, yes, but also the emotional clutter. Unspoken worries, unprocessed tensions, unresolved thoughts hanging in the air like dust. A quiet room, with dim light and soft textures, speaks to your nervous system. It says, "You are safe. There is nothing to fix right now." Simplicity is not sterile. It is calm. Preparing a space for sleep is a form of respect. Turning off the unnecessary light, closing the laptop, setting down the phone. These are not just habits. They are signals that tell your mind the day is done. In that closure, there is peace. Simplicity becomes an act of self-honesty, a conscious choice to release what does not serve the life you wish to build. And it is often in the removal of the unnecessary that the essential becomes visible. At night, when your thoughts try to multiply, simplicity brings them back to one. This moment, this breath, this space. Your body takes its cues from your environment. When the space around you calms, your body follows. This extends to your emotional space, too. Letting go of the day's excess means putting down the stories you don't need to carry into tomorrow. Simplicity at night is about release. The Stoics taught that you meet life better when you are rested, not restless. And letting go of excess is not a loss. It is a return to what matters, to what heals. When you simplify, you are not shrinking your world. You are making space for the parts that count. And in that space, you are telling your mind, you can let go now, you can rest. A strange shame can creep into the quiet hours, when your mind simply refuses to settle. You lie in the dark, exhausted but awake, as thoughts turn in a restless loop. An inner voice begins to whisper, framing this restlessness not as a state, but as a failure, a weakness. But it is not. The Stoics understood that the human mind, even at its most disciplined, is not immune to turbulence. The presence of a restless mind is not a flaw in your character. It is a signal that you are, in fact, exquisitely human. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor of Rome, wrote in his private journals about the weight of a restless mind. He struggled with thoughts that would not stop. He once wrote, "The mind that is anxious about future events is miserable." But notice what he did not say. He did not say it was broken. He simply observed it, named it, and accepted it. Restlessness was not his enemy. It was part of the terrain he had to navigate. This is a core tenet of Stoic thought, to see things as they are, not worse than they are. There is freedom in this idea, that you are not alone in the tossing and turning. Even the wise have sat in the dark, overwhelmed by their own thoughts. As Carl Jung put it, even a happy life cannot be without a measure of darkness. Restlessness is a shadow, rising when parts of the self need attention, not rejection. What the Stoics would remind us then is that restlessness is not a problem to be solved with force, but a state to be met with understanding. Consider it a signal, one that asks for your patience. It may be a sign of something unresolved, something you've pushed beneath the surface of the day, now rising to demand its due. Or it could mean nothing at all, simply the nervous energy of living in a complicated world. In either case, to judge this feeling is to give it power. To accept it is to make it manageable. We often confuse stillness with silence, but they are not the same. Stillness is not the absence of thought. It is the presence of perspective. You can be filled with thoughts and still be grounded. You can feel a wave of anxiety wash over you and still be okay. This is the very reframing, the gentle shift in perspective the Stoics invite us to make. They never said, "Do not feel." They said, "Feel and learn to navigate the feeling." Aristotle spoke of finding balance, the golden mean between extremes. Courage, he taught, lies somewhere between fear and recklessness. Perhaps peace, then, lies somewhere between chaos and denial. If you are restless tonight, it may not mean that something is wrong. It may simply mean you are in motion, emotionally, psychologically, even as your body is still. This is not a fault. It is the current of life itself, moving through you. The problem is not restlessness. It is the story we attach to it. This means I am failing. This means I am weak. This means I am broken. But what if that story is wrong? What if restlessness is not a verdict, but a process? A sign that your entire system, body, mind, and heart, is simply processing. What if the goal tonight is not to eliminate this energy, but to meet it differently, to soften around it, to observe it, to breathe with it? Here, the Stoics were far ahead of their time. They understood that most of our suffering comes not from an experience itself, but from our resistance to it. As Epictetus said, we suffer not from the events in our lives, but from our judgment about them. So when restlessness arrives and we label it a failure, we double our own suffering. But when we see it merely as movement, a natural part of the human rhythm, we give ourselves room to settle without force, room to be okay, even when we are not yet calm. There is a quiet strength in this, not the loud, confident strength we are used to seeing celebrated, but a deeper kind. The strength to sit with discomfort without rushing to escape it. The strength to acknowledge racing thoughts without letting them define your worth. The strength to say, this, too, is part of the night. The Stoics believed that character is forged not in moments of ease, but in how we face the things we cannot immediately fix. And restlessness is one of those things. It is a visitor. It does not respond well to being forced out. But if you make space for it, if you treat it as something familiar rather than foreign, it will often loosen its grip, the same way a storm, no matter how fierce, never lasts forever. So the next time your mind will not settle, remember this: you are not doing something wrong. You are experiencing what people have always experienced, even the wise, even the strong, even the quiet ones. You are not failing. You are feeling. And when you can see restlessness not as a sign of weakness, but as part of the process, it begins to lose its sting. You begin to soften. You begin to breathe. And eventually, gently, you begin to rest, not in the absence of thought, but in the acceptance of it. The Stoics would call that wisdom. And perhaps, for tonight, that is enough. There is a particular kind of heaviness that gathers when worries lose their edges, blurring into a single, shapeless, and persistent weight. They do not line up neatly or wait their turn. They pile one on top of the other until it feels as though you are carrying things that do not even belong to you. And maybe that is the problem. Maybe the weight we feel at night is not just from our own responsibilities, but from all the things we have collected in our minds that were never really ours to hold. The Stoics had a remedy for this kind of emotional clutter, a clear, grounded thought experiment known as the dichotomy of control. And its power has not faded with time. When Epictetus said that some things are in our control and others are not, he wasn't making a casual observation. He was offering an inner compass, a way to sift through the mental storm and sort out what is real, what is yours, and what is not. It sounds simple, almost too simple. But that is its beauty. Simplicity, when it cuts through chaos, becomes a form of clarity. It allows you to see with new eyes. And so, the experiment begins. When your mind starts racing, when you feel buried under looping thoughts and unfinished conversations, pause. The goal is not to stop the thoughts, but to observe them with gentleness and distance. Imagine laying each thought out, one by one. Not to pass judgment, but simply to ask a single, clarifying question. Is this within my control, or is it not? The answer isn't always obvious at first, but when you truly look, it becomes clear. The strange look someone gave you earlier, out of your control. The weather tomorrow, out of your control. Your reaction to that look, your preparation for the rain, that is yours. The distinction is subtle but transformative. Suddenly, the field of worry shrinks, not because you forced it to, but because you filtered it. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist persists." When we fight every worry as if it is our job to solve it all, we give it our power. But when we simply sort these thoughts, like items in a drawer, we reclaim that power. We do not need to hold what does not belong to us. In doing so, we create space in the mind. Not silence necessarily, but room to breathe, room to think clearly. There is something deeply human in this process, this desire to carry everything, to believe that if we worry about something hard enough, we might stop it from happening. This is the illusion that worry equals preparation. But Stoicism calls this out. It reminds us that worry without action is just noise, and noise is exhausting. Action, on the other hand, is grounding. That is why this practice isn't just about letting go. It is also about stepping up. Once you have set aside the things you cannot control, what remains are the things you can. Your thoughts, your actions, your very next step. And those are not small things. They are the foundation of your peace. The Stoics did not preach passivity. They were not saying, do nothing. They were saying, do what is yours to do, and nothing more. Plato wrote about the importance of order in the soul, that disorder in the mind creates suffering. And what is cluttered thought, if not disorder? The moment we begin to name, to sort, to place, we start to restore that inner balance, not with force, but with awareness. Think of it like this. Your mind is a room, and every worry is an object within it. Some of those objects are yours, your responsibilities, your values, your actions. Others are things you picked up without even realizing, other people's expectations, tomorrow's unknowns, yesterday's mistakes. They do not belong here. So what happens if you begin to clear the room? Not to make it empty, but to make it livable, peaceful, yours. This is where self-compassion enters the picture. It is easy to feel ashamed of how much space worry takes up, easy to tell yourself, I should be stronger, or I should have let this go by now. But that mindset only adds to the weight. Socrates believed that self-awareness was the beginning of wisdom, but he never said it had to come with self-judgment. Awareness is about truth, not shame. And the truth is, you have been carrying too much. The truth is, it is okay to set some of it down. Sometimes all it takes is a single act of clarity, writing down your thoughts, drawing two columns, what I control and what I don't. Not in pursuit of perfection, but in practice of perspective. It is strange how such a small ritual can shift your entire state of mind. It takes thoughts out of the fog and puts them where you can see them. And when you see clearly, you begin to feel differently. Lighter. Not empty, just unburdened. This is not a one-time fix. It is a daily practice, a gentle sorting of the soul, because life will never stop handing you new worries. But the more you practice this experiment, the quicker you become at recognizing what is yours and what is not. And slowly, your mind begins to trust that it doesn't have to hold everything at once, that you are allowed to rest, that you are allowed to release. Aristotle believed that true freedom comes from living in alignment with reason. And what could be more reasonable than choosing not to fight battles you cannot win? The worries that linger in the night often pretend to be urgent, but when seen in the soft light of reason, much of their power dissolves. You begin to notice what actually requires your energy and what just steals it. And in that noticing, you begin to recover your strength. So when the thoughts rise tonight, and they will, try this. Do not chase them. Do not fight them. Simply look at them. Place them gently into one of two spaces, and know that the ones outside your control do not require your sacrifice. They only ask for your release. That small act of choice. That is where your power lives. Not in knowing all the answers, but in knowing what is yours to carry, and what, kindly, you can now let go. To the Stoics, rest was never a luxury. It was not an escape from effort or a reward for survival. It was preparation, a sacred, quiet interval between moments of engagement with the world. This is a difficult shift for us to make, especially in a culture that treats exhaustion like a badge of honor and sees rest as an indulgence or even a weakness. But the Stoics were wiser than that. They saw sleep not as the absence of doing, but as part of the discipline of living. Seneca wrote that we should give as much care to the end of the day as to its beginning, not because it was time to shut down, but because that stillness was part of the rhythm of strength. For when the body lies down at night, the mind rarely follows suit. It begins to whisper of all the things we forgot to finish, all the versions of ourselves we feel we should have been. This is not weakness. It is friction, the collision of effort and self-expectation. The Stoics would urge us to reframe that chaos not as a failure, but as a signal, a sign that the system is overburdened, that even warriors must sharpen the sword, not swing it endlessly. Marcus Aurelius, emperor and philosopher, wrote in his Meditations, "If you seek tranquility, do less." He did not say do nothing, but rather do what is essential. And rest, he understood, is essential. Rest prepares the mind in the same way training prepares the body, not through absence, but through structure. A restful mind is a ready mind, and readiness, in Stoicism, is everything. It is not just about being alert. It is about being composed, calm enough to see clearly, and strong enough to act wisely. When you deny yourself rest, you rob tomorrow of your best self, and the Stoics knew the danger in that. They believed that nothing should be wasted, not time, not thought, not energy. So if rest can renew those resources, then rest is not optional. It is your responsibility. Carl Jung believed that what you ignore in your waking life will visit you in your dreams. The Stoics understood this innately. Rest is not just for the body. It is for the processing of emotion, thought, and conflict. At night, the things we have pushed aside during the day rise to the surface. That is not a flaw in the design. That is the design. It is the mind's attempt to balance the accounts, to restore order. If you meet that moment with resistance, if you treat rest as something you must earn, it only adds to the pressure. But if you see it as a strategic pause, one that clears the fog and strengthens your resolve, then sleep becomes something deeper than a break. It becomes part of your practice. Plato once said, "The part can never be well unless the whole is well." And that is the paradox of how we treat rest today. We try to be mentally sharp while physically exhausted, emotionally available while spiritually depleted. The Stoics did not separate these things. To them, wellness was wholeness, and wholeness required rest. Not as a reward, but as a rhythm, like breathing. Inhale effort, exhale rest. Neither is optional. Both are essential. There is also a humility in rest that Stoicism respects. It is a moment of surrender, not of defeat, but of self-awareness. To say, "I cannot go on like this," is not weakness. It is wisdom. It is the refusal to burn yourself out chasing an illusion of perfection. Aristotle said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." And what better way to know yourself than in those quiet moments before sleep, when you finally hear what the noise of the day has drowned out? In that stillness, you see what you have ignored, what you have feared, what you need. And those insights do not arrive while you are charging forward. They arrive when you stop. Rest is not a detour from the path. It is the path. It is where the mind rehearses virtue in silence, where the soul takes inventory and lays down what it cannot carry into another day. Rest is where philosophy ceases to be theory and starts to be lived. And maybe that is what we have forgotten, that rest is not passive. It is active peace. It is the moment where the body resets, the mind recalibrates, and the heart grows quiet enough to feel what is real. The Stoics were not about escapism. They did not say, "Do not feel." They said, "Do not be ruled by what you feel." And how can you know what rules you if you never pause to reflect? This is why rest isn't punishment. It isn't a timeout for failing to do more. It is preparation for doing what matters, but better, deeper, and cleaner. It is where the dust settles, where thoughts slow, and where the next day's strength begins. Even in silence, the Stoics knew there is motion. Even in stillness, there is power. So if you have been telling yourself that you cannot rest until you have earned it, consider this. Rest is not something you buy with productivity. It is the foundation on which productivity is built. It is not a break from life. It is where life is restored. And when you treat it that way, something changes. You stop racing the clock. You stop measuring your worth by your exhaustion. You start listening. You start noticing. You start preparing. Because when tomorrow comes, and it will, you will need everything you have gathered tonight. The clarity, the calm, the quiet strength of someone who is not running, but ready. And if that is not Stoic, what is? There is something in the deep silence of the night that reminds us of a simple, humbling truth. Everything is temporary. The laughter from earlier, the tension from an argument, the small victories and missteps of the day. They all fade into a kind of stillness that asks a different question. What actually matters, right now? And often we do not like the answer, because so much of our worry, our rushing, our reaching, turns out to be noise, loud in the moment, but meaningless when held against the vast backdrop of impermanence. The Stoics understood this deeply. Memento mori, they whispered, not to frighten, but to remind. Remember, you must die. Not in a grim way, but in a way that makes everything else clearer. Carl Jung said that life is a short pause between two great mysteries. And in that pause, we spend so much time chasing permanence, wanting people to stay, projects to succeed, moments to last forever. But the truth is, nothing does. Not even the emotions that feel so overwhelming right now. And while that can sound bleak at first, it is actually where freedom begins. Because when you stop clinging to what you cannot keep, you start holding gently what is here. You start realizing that peace does not come from control, it comes from perspective. When Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think," he was not inviting despair, but clarity. He was handing us a compass for our focus. He knew that if you carried that awareness, not in panic, but in quiet humility, you would waste less time. You would argue less over things that will not matter a year from now. You would let go of the need to win, to be right, to chase everything at once. Because when you remember the limits of your time, you use it better. At night, this truth settles in naturally. The world slows, distractions fade, and you are left alone with your mind. And what the mind brings forth in those moments, regrets, fears, old stories, is usually rooted in the illusion of permanence. The belief that something should have lasted, that something must be fixed, that you should be more, or have more, or know more by now. But the Stoics would ask, compared to what? Compared to whom? Time humbles us all. Seneca reminded us, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." And so much of that waste comes from obsessing over the unimportant, from giving our energy to things that crumble under the weight of time. When you reflect on impermanence with gentleness, something opens up within you. You start to see the day not as a blur of duties and reactions, but as a collection of moments, some worth keeping, some worth letting go. You remember that the people you love will not be here forever, and so you soften your tone. You recall that today's mistake will eventually fade, and so you stop replaying it in your mind. You realize that the pressure to have it all figured out is a game that nobody ever wins. Plato once wrote, "The greatest wealth is to live content with little." And contentment comes easier when you are not trying to outlast time, but to walk with it. This reflection need not be a grand, dramatic affair, nor does it ask for solemn rituals. Sometimes it is as simple as noticing the sky, the way the light shifts, the way your own breath slows without you even trying. It is the quiet act of remembering that this very moment is already slipping through your fingers. And instead of tightening your grip, you find yourself letting go. You stop needing to fill every silence. You stop trying to make every thought productive, because rest too becomes sacred when you realize how fleeting the chance to feel it really is. Socrates famously said that the unexamined life is not worth living. The Stoics, however, might add that an over-examined life can become paralyzing. True reflection isn't about trapping yourself in a cycle of guilt for every past decision. It is about gently cutting through the clutter of what no longer matters. It's the quiet art of asking, what part of this can I release? What anxiety is merely noise? What tension am I carrying simply because I forgot I don't have to? A profound calm arrives when you accept that not everything is yours to solve, that not every knot needs to be pulled tighter, and not every fear requires a fix. As Epictetus put it so plainly, some things are up to us, and some things are not. When you truly sit with that idea, not just agreeing with it in theory, but living it in your bones, you become lighter. You stop chasing outcomes as if they define your worth. You cease to fear endings as if they could undo everything that came before. It's remarkable how much of what keeps us awake at night is tied to things we won't even remember in our later years. The embarrassing text, the missed opportunity, the clumsy phrase. In the moment, each feels like a permanent mark, until we recall how swiftly everything moves. Time erodes even the sharpest of memories. What lasts is how we carried ourselves through it all, how present we were, and how often we chose peace when chaos was also an option. There is no need to fear the end of life. What is worth fearing is a life never truly lived, one spent postponing joy, holding on to grudges, and staying busy just to avoid the silence. But in those quiet moments, when you finally let go, when you breathe deeply, when you simply are, that is where life happens. And that is where the Stoics invite us to return. Not to escape life's impermanence, but to embrace it. For when you remember that you will one day lose everything, you learn to love it all more deeply. When you realize that you cannot repeat this day, you begin to choose more carefully what fills it. And when you finally understand that your thoughts, your worries, and your stories are temporary, you gain the power to decide which ones are worth keeping. Perhaps tonight, instead of racing towards sleep or rehearsing tomorrow's anxieties, you can let this awareness settle softly, not with fear, but with peace. Memento mori. It is not a warning, but a gift, a reminder to live fully, let go gently, and rest deeply. Because this moment, right here, right now, is already enough. There is a certain peace that only nature knows how to offer. The quiet pulse of the sea, the endless stretch of the sky, the slow drift of clouds across a fading sunset. The Stoics weren't just thinkers, they were observers. They looked outward as often as they looked inward, not to escape their minds, but because they knew the world beyond us has a way of steadying the world within us. Marcus Aurelius, one of history's most powerful men, still found solace in the cosmos. "Dwell on the beauty of life," he wrote. "Watch the stars, and see yourself running with them." This was not merely a poetic suggestion. It was a prescription, a way to return to stillness when the mind felt too full, too scattered, too small. Modern science is slowly catching up to this ancient wisdom. We now know that gazing at natural scenes, trees swaying in the wind, waves rising and falling, activates the parasympathetic nervous system. This is the part of us that slows the heartbeat, deepens the breath, and tells the body, "You are safe now." The Stoics didn't need brain scans to understand this. They had awareness. They noticed that nature does not rush or panic. It simply flows. The river doesn't argue with the rocks. The wind doesn't ask permission to move through the branches. The stars don't explain their light, they just shine. The closer we align ourselves with that rhythm, the more we remember a simple truth we so often forget. We belong to it, too. Carl Jung once said, "The least of things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it." Nature is woven with meaning. A falling leaf is not just a leaf. It is a lesson in letting go. A storm is not just weather. It is proof that even chaos comes and goes. These are not metaphors. They are reminders. They show us what it looks like to exist without clinging, a state we forget when our thoughts spiral in the dark, when we believe we must fix everything, solve the unsolvable, before we can allow ourselves to sleep. A tree does not overthink autumn. The tide does not rehearse its return. That kind of acceptance, the letting be, the letting go, softens something tight within us. This is why we walk outside to calm down, why our breath slows near water, why the stars quiet us without even trying. The Stoics believed this connection was not random, but essential. As Seneca said, "We are part of the whole, as limbs to a body." We are not above nature, not separate from it, but participants within it. So when life feels overwhelming and the mind won't stop churning, it is not weakness to step outside and look up. It is wisdom. It is remembering that the nervous system is not soothed by control, but by rhythm, space, and stillness. Nature offers all three, without asking for anything in return. When your thoughts are racing, your breath usually is too. And when your breath changes, your body follows. Epictetus, who once lived as a slave, understood that true freedom was internal. "No man is free," he said, "who is not master of himself." To be a master of yourself is not about domination. It is about returning to calm, breathing through the storm, and staying rooted when the world shakes. You learn this not by overthinking, but by watching the sea. You feel it in the breeze. You remember it under the night sky. Even Socrates, who questioned everything, understood the need to be still. He walked often, spoke slowly, and paused before he answered. That pacing was about more than just clarity. It was about energy. He knew that truth does not rush, a fact we forget when the mind gets loud. We believe peace must be earned through relentless analysis. But true peace comes from presence. And presence is most easily found when you are gazing into something vast, like the ocean or the night sky. Perhaps the most calming part of all is the perspective it offers. The way a star can remind you how small your problems are, without making you feel small. The way a mountain shows you what it means to endure, not through effort, but by simply remaining. As Aristotle said, "In all things of nature, there is something of the marvelous." When you feel that marvel deeply, you begin to breathe again, not just because it is beautiful, but because it is ancient. It connects you to a time before your worries, before your plans, before you believed you had to earn your rest. A time when simply being alive was enough. So when your mind refuses to settle, you may not need more thinking. You may not need another answer. You may simply need to remember that serenity is not built, but returned to. The Stoics pointed us back to nature because nature points us back to ourselves, not to our productivity or our titles, but to the part of us that already knows how to rest, how to be held by the present moment, and how to sit in silence and feel whole. You don't need a forest or a mountain to find this. Sometimes, all you need is to notice the breath in your lungs and imagine the wind moving through trees. To close your eyes and picture stars scattered across a sky so wide it makes your fear feel manageable. This is not just imagination, it is medicine. And when you return to that place, even for a few minutes, something changes. Not everything, but enough. Enough to slow the heart, to ease the grip of fear, and to remind yourself that not all tension needs to be solved. Some of it just needs space. Nature gives it freely. Go looking for the stars, for your breath, for the memory of a breeze. The Stoics were offering more than a philosophy. They were offering a way to come home to yourself through the world that made you, quietly, gently, and without pressure. Just the kind of calm that waits for you, always, like the sea. There is a strange guilt that can creep in when we try to rest. Not the physical rest of lying down, but the deeper rest of the mind finally letting go. It whispers, "You should be thinking about that email," or "You haven't solved that problem yet." We have learned to measure our worth by what we are constantly holding, but the Stoics saw through this illusion. They knew that carrying everything, all the time, wasn't strength. It was a form of suffering. Peace came not from doing more, but from putting things down, one by one, deliberately and without shame. This surrender is not laziness, it is clarity. As Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This includes our compulsion to overthink, to grind through exhaustion, and to drag our worries with us into the night. We believe we are being responsible, but in reality, we are letting our unconscious fears run the show. The Stoics would argue that wisdom isn't just knowing what to think, but knowing when to stop thinking, when to close the mental tabs that no longer serve the present moment. This is where intentional unwinding begins, not through force, but through compassion. Letting the mind place things down is a practice of faith, faith that you can return to them later, that rest is not abandonment, and that peace is not procrastination. Even while leading an empire, Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That strength begins at night, when the world quiets and all that remains is your own inner noise. It is tested not by how much you can hold, but by how gently you can release. It helps to picture your thoughts as objects you have picked up throughout the day. A sharp comment, a small mistake, a recurring worry. You do not need to resolve them all right now. You just need to set them down. You can even say it aloud. "I will hold this tomorrow, but not tonight." Not every concern is urgent. Not every thought is a fire that needs to be extinguished. Some are just flickers, and without the fuel of your attention, they go out on their own. Letting go is not denial. It is discernment. It is choosing what truly deserves your energy. When you begin to put your thoughts down, you may notice the body loosening in response. The jaw unclenches, the shoulders drop, the breath deepens. The nervous system finally receives the signal that there is no immediate danger. The guilt we feel about resting is learned. It is a cultural habit, not a natural one. No animal hesitates to sleep because it feels it hasn't earned it. This is a burden we picked up, and it is one we can unlearn. The Stoics did so by valuing calm over chaos, not because they were indifferent, but because they knew that holding on eventually becomes harm. Letting the mind rest is an act of trust, trust that clarity returns after rest, and that tomorrow's problems are best handled by a mind that is restored. So tonight, if you feel that familiar tug of war between peace and guilt, remind yourself that putting things down is not failure. It is wisdom. Just as a craftsman sets down his tools at the end of the day, you do not lose ground by resting. You build strength quietly, in a way the world may not notice, but you will. And if a thought insists on lingering, meet it with kindness. Name it. This is worry. This is fear. And then breathe it out, gently setting it aside. Over time, this becomes a ritual of alignment, building resilience not from exhaustion, but from intentional recovery. The unexamined life is not worth living, but the over-examined life, the one that refuses to rest, is not worth living either. There is a middle ground, a space where reflection and release coexist, a place where you can care deeply and still sleep well. That is what letting go truly is. Not forgetting, but placing things where they belong. And sometimes, that place is not your mind at midnight. Sometimes, it is the morning, and sometimes, it is never again. Peace is not about having no thoughts. It is about choosing which ones stay and allowing the rest to rest, just like you. There is a subtle power in stopping the punishment for how the day went and starting to learn from it instead. Most of us carry guilt like a backpack of stones. Every mistake, every unfinished task, every harsh word follows us into the night. But guilt was never meant to be a permanent weight. It is a signal, not a sentence. What the Stoics understood was the difference between reflection and self-condemnation. One helps you grow, the other keeps you stuck. Marcus Aurelius began his days by remembering what a privilege it was to be alive. He ended them by reviewing his actions without cruelty. This nightly ritual is not about listing everything you did wrong. It is about meeting your flaws with honesty and your efforts with compassion. You might say to yourself, "Today I spoke when I should have listened," or "I acted from fear instead of patience." You say this not as a punishment, but as a gentle acknowledgement, like someone cleaning a mirror, not smashing it. When practiced with kindness, self-reflection becomes a return home. It is a quiet recognition that you are still learning, that growth is not linear, and that slipping into old patterns does not erase your progress. In that space between the end of the day and the beginning of sleep, there is a chance to rewrite your relationship with guilt. You do not avoid accountability by being kind to yourself. You increase your capacity for change. Harshness narrows the mind. Compassion opens it. Think of how you would speak to a friend who came to you with regret. You deserve that same gentle tone. Plato wrote that the first and best victory is to conquer the self. He meant it not through force, but through understanding. You cannot transform what you refuse to look at. So sit with your day. Ask yourself where you fell short, not to scold, but to notice the gap between who you were and who you want to become. This is not weakness. It is direction. You don't need hours to do this. A few quiet minutes is enough. Start with one simple question. What did I learn today? Not what did I achieve, but what did I learn? Seen through that lens, even a mistake becomes valuable. Over time, this practice will soften you, not in a passive way, but in a grounded one. You will start to notice your triggers before they ignite. You will learn to meet your imperfections not with shame, but with the quiet resolve to try again tomorrow, rested and renewed. You will feel the long-held patterns of your life begin to loosen their grip. You will know the difference between the guilt that drains your spirit and the reflection that guides it. This is the work of nightly compassion. It gently replaces judgment with awareness, and it is from this awareness that all true change is born. This practice also calms the hum of your nervous system. It sends a quiet signal to the body that there is no danger here. We are reviewing, not reliving. There is no need to tense, no need to brace against the shadows of the past. This is how peace slips in, not by pushing thoughts away, but by welcoming them as teachers. They are teachers of a different sort, not those who shout or shame, but those who sit with you in the quiet rooms of your mind and gently remind you, you've made it through the day. Let's talk about what we learned. Aristotle believed that excellence is not an act, but a habit. These nightly reflections, when practiced with care, become exactly that. A habit of mental clarity, a habit of emotional honesty, and like all good habits, it builds upon itself over time. Each night you grow a little better at seeing yourself without distortion, a little more skilled at guiding yourself with intention, a little more rooted in who you truly are, not just who you wish you were. And perhaps that is the point. The person you wish to become is not as distant as you imagine. They simply need your patience. They need your willingness to look at yourself without cruelty, to accept that some days will feel like steps backward. But even these steps are part of the path, if you are paying attention, if you are willing to keep showing up with open eyes and a steady heart. The Stoics never promised this process would be easy, only that it would be worth it. Because it is in these quiet, honest moments that we stop outsourcing our growth to fate or chance. We reclaim it, one thought at a time, one breath at a time, one compassionate reflection at a time. In doing so, we begin to understand that guilt has nothing left to teach us once its initial lesson is learned. Growth begins not by clinging to it, but by releasing it with gratitude, thanking it for the warning, and then letting it go. So you can rest. So you can begin again tomorrow, a little lighter, a little clearer, a little more yourself. Real strength is not always explosive. It is not the power that slams a fist on a table or commands a crowded room. Sometimes, true strength is the ability to sit in silence while the future remains a question mark. Stoic resilience, at its core, is precisely this. Not the absence of fear or confusion, but the ability to endure them with grace. It is the choice of presence over panic, of stillness over the spiraling of the mind. The Stoics never promised certainty. They embraced life's profound uncertainty and built their peace not on controlling the uncontrollable, but on mastering their response to it. We place a unique pressure on ourselves to appear unshaken, to project an image of perfect control. But Stoic resilience does not ask for such a performance. It asks only for honesty. You do not need to fake confidence or pretend you are fearless. You need only to stay present with what is. Not what might be, not what should have been, just what is. In the words of Marcus Aurelius, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. This wisdom does not erase suffering, but it reminds us where our power lies, not in perfect plans, but in our perspective. Carl Jung once said, "Even a happy life cannot be without a measure of darkness." He did not say to fight the darkness or to run from it. He suggested that resilience means including it, holding it, letting it be part of your story without allowing it to become the whole story. Stoic resilience reflects this same principle. You sit with discomfort, and instead of wrestling it into an instant solution, you breathe through it. You let the noise in your mind come and go without demanding that an answer appear. This is not passivity. It is patience. It is an endurance that does not shout, but waits with quiet strength. This kind of steadiness cannot be feigned. It is built slowly, night by night, challenge by challenge. You cultivate it not by avoiding difficulty, but by showing up for it. When uncertainty presses against your chest and you do not know what comes next, you stay. You do not run. You stay, you breathe, and you remind yourself you have handled the unknown before. You are handling it now. That is resilience. Not a dramatic declaration, but a soft, internal decision to continue. Plato believed the measure of a person is what they do with power. But there is another kind of power that lives in restraint, in not reacting when everything inside you wants to, in holding your composure when things seem to be collapsing, in whispering to yourself, "This moment is uncomfortable, but it is not permanent." That thought alone can bring you back to yourself. It can transform panic into presence. Because peace, in the Stoic sense, is not a life without problems. It is the ability to meet problems without collapsing into them. This is why Stoic resilience feels so different from the strength we are often told to admire. It doesn't always arrive with bold decisions or confident speeches. Sometimes it is found in small, quiet acts. Making your bed when you feel numb. Journaling when your thoughts are tangled. Pausing before you say something you will regret. It is in choosing not to escape through distraction, but to stay long enough to feel what is real. That is inner discipline. Not coldness, but clarity. You begin to notice that peace does not arrive hand in hand with answers. It arrives when you stop needing them immediately. The Stoics trained themselves to stay with uncertainty without losing themselves in it, to trust that clarity comes in time, but that courage is needed now. This is something we can all practice. It is not about silencing fear, but about learning to walk beside it. Socrates said, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing." That humility is the foundation of true resilience. If you can accept not knowing, you free yourself from the tyranny of believing you should have it all figured out. Something powerful happens when you stop demanding control and start cultivating composure. You realize that calm is not a byproduct of everything going your way. It is a decision you can make even when nothing does. This doesn't mean you feel good all the time. It means you don't abandon yourself when you feel bad. You stay grounded, even when the ground beneath you shifts. You keep breathing, even when your mind races. This approach doesn't make uncertainty disappear, but it makes it less frightening. When you stop resisting what you cannot control, you create space to respond to what you can. You move out of panic and into presence, and that presence becomes your strength, not in a loud, obvious way, but in a steady, quiet way, like the tide moving forward without rushing, like a mountain holding its place in a storm. The beauty of Stoic resilience is that it is available to everyone. It does not depend on status, money, or luck. It depends on perspective and practice. You do not need to be perfect to be strong. You only need to return to yourself again and again, especially when it is hard, especially when it is uncertain. That is what makes it real. So when you lie awake at night, unsure of what tomorrow brings, let that be okay. Let it be human. Let it be part of the mystery you do not have to solve right now. And in that space, you might find something deeper than answers. You might find acceptance, the kind that holds you gently and reminds you, even here, even now, you are not broken. You are simply learning to endure without explanation, to trust without a timeline, to sit quietly with life just as it is, and still find peace. We often treat sleep as a mere shutdown, the flick of a switch on a machine that has worked its fill for the day. But what if sleep wasn't an escape? What if it wasn't about running from thoughts or stress, but was instead a gentle return to alignment? A recalibration with your truest self, the part of you that isn't caught in ego or deadlines or the noise of the world. For true rest is not the absence of doing. It is the deep restoration of being. The Stoics, though warriors in the realm of action, understood the sacred weight of stillness. They sought sleep not as a form of collapse, but as a quiet reflection of a life lived in harmony with one's values, with nature, with oneself. The philosopher Seneca wrote that every night we should call ourselves to account. What infirmity have I mastered today? What passions opposed? What temptation resisted? This was not to end the day in judgment, but in awareness, a kind of inner housekeeping. In doing so, sleep became more than physical rest. It became spiritual alignment, a gentle laying down of the burdens we need not carry, and an honoring of the virtues that still call to be cultivated. When you treat sleep this way, not as a crash, but as a conscious return, you begin to notice a shift in how your days feel too, because you are no longer running, you are returning. Carl Jung said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." And strangely, it is in the quiet just before you slip into sleep that this awakening can begin. You catch a glimpse of the mind without its performance, without its masks. You see the raw truth of your emotional state. Sometimes it is calm, sometimes it is messy, but it is always real. And this realness, if you welcome it, can anchor you. You are not trying to perform Stoicism. You are practicing the kind of self-respect that allows peace to find you. Peace does not knock loudly. It waits for space, and stillness creates that space. So many of us resist rest because we believe we must earn it. We wear our exhaustion like a badge of honor. We rehearse the guilt of unfinished work even as our head meets the pillow. But the Stoics would remind us that virtue is not found in endless striving, but in right action. And sometimes, the most virtuous action you can take is to surrender your tension, not to fight it. Marcus Aurelius, an emperor with responsibilities beyond our imagining, often reminded himself, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions, than your own soul." That is alignment. It is not geographical or circumstantial, but internal. It is what happens when you stop fleeing your experience and begin accepting it. Plato wrote that the soul takes on the color of its thoughts. If our thoughts are constantly scattered, anxious, and self-critical, then that is the state we fall asleep in. But if we learn to guide those thoughts gently, to notice them, name them, soften them, our mind becomes a safer place to rest. This isn't about toxic positivity or pretending all is well. It is about cultivating an honest, humble relationship with yourself. One where your nervous system no longer has to brace for impact every night. One where you are no longer afraid of what the silence might show you. In this sense, sleep becomes a mirror, not one that accuses, but one that simply reflects. And when your reflection is tangled in restlessness or fear, the answer is not to judge. It is to listen. What is this resistance trying to say? What value is being ignored? What wound is asking to be acknowledged? The night becomes less of a void and more of a teacher. And each night, if you allow it, you get a chance to realign, to come back to what truly matters. Not productivity, not image, but essence. There is a profound integrity in facing the day fully, and then, just as fully, releasing it. No clinging, no rewriting, no obsessing, just the quiet trust that you did what you could, and now you let go. Aristotle believed that happiness is the activity of the soul in accordance with virtue, and implied within that is that this must include rest. For you cannot be virtuous when you are depleted. You cannot offer clarity to others when your own inner waters are muddied. Rest is not separate from your path. It is the part of the path where you lay down the armor, wash your hands, and come back to yourself. There is no ceremony for this, no audience, just you and the dark and the subtle returning of breath to body, of awareness to the present, of effort to stillness. That simplicity is sacred. That moment when you finally allow your mind to set down its weapons. Not in defeat, but in peace. That is the reward. That is alignment. You are not escaping anything. You are participating in the deepest act of respect for your own humanity. When you shift how you see rest, the whole rhythm of your life begins to change. You stop measuring your days by what you have conquered and begin to measure them by how deeply you have shown up. At night, you do not crash into unconsciousness. You arrive calmly, mindfully, at that threshold between noise and silence. And you choose silence, not because you are giving up, but because you are choosing to begin again, refreshed. Tomorrow will have its own weight. Tonight, you put it down. In this way, sleep is not the end. It is the gentle space between chapters. And the story you tell yourself in that space shapes how you will wake. So tell it gently. Tell it honestly. Tell it in a way that honors both your effort and your imperfection. Because in the quiet, when all distractions fade, what is left is not your performance. It is your essence. And returning to that essence, night after night, without guilt, without judgment, and with grace, that is what alignment truly means. You do not have to fix everything tonight. You do not have to solve the world from your pillow. All you have to do is return to yourself, gently, honestly, without shame. That is the kind of peace the Stoics honored. Not perfection, but presence. And if even for a moment you felt that here with us, you are already on the path. If this quiet reflection helped you breathe a little deeper, there is another video waiting on the screen that might meet you right where you are. Thank you for being part of Stoic Journal. It means more than you know. Until next time, stay steady, stay soft, and keep the wisdom close.